Hi, today we are going to talk about the silent letters that are usually not pronounced in a word. Listen carefully, repeat and memorize the word very well so you can use it in your daily life. And don't forget to subscribe too. So, as you know, one of the most frustrating things in English is the fact that many words have letters that we don't pronounce at all. These are called silent letters. Unfortunately, there's nothing that you or we can do to change this, but there are some rules which can help us. Yes, you heard me, there are some rules. Knowing these rules about silent letters can really help your pronunciation, so today we are going to explain those rules and also give you lots of examples. If you can think of more examples while you're watching this video, please write them in the comments. Are you ready? Let's go.
Let's first look at the letter A. Most of the time we do pronounce the letter A, but if a word ends in I-C-A-L-L-Y, most people don't pronounce it. Here are some examples. Try to copy them after me. Automatically, basically, chaotically, logically, practically, specifically, surgically. But be careful, because that rule doesn't apply to all words that end in A-double-L-Y. For example, in these words, we pronounce the A. Ideally, generally, vocally. So this rule just applies to words that end in I-C-A-L-L-Y, like basically or specifically. Now let's look at the letter B. We usually don't pronounce the B if it's after M at the end of a word. For example, bomb. It's not bomb. The last sound is m. So just pretend that the B isn't there. It's bomb. Bomb. Some more examples. Climb. Comb. Crumb. Dumb. Lamb. Limb. Numb. Succumb. Thumb. Tomb. Womb. Yes, all of these words end in the sound m. So this is not a thumb, it's a thumb. Thumb. Pretend that the B isn't there. Occasionally, the B is silent after an M in the middle of a word. For example, in climber and plumber. Climber, plumber. When MB is in the middle of a word, most of the time you pronounce both letters. For example, in these words: ambiguous, member, number, symbol, umbrella. So if MB is not at the end of a word, the vast majority of the time we pronounce the B. There are also a few words in which the B is silent before the letter T. These words are debt, doubt, and subtle. This also applies to words that have these words as their root. For example, debtor, doubtful, subtlety. Now let's look at the letter C. The C is almost always silent if it comes after an S and before an E or an I. For example, descent, fascinate, fluorescent, scene, scent, science, scissors. It's also silent after the S in this word, muscle, muscle. That's just an exception that's important to know. And now the letter D. D is silent before the letter G. Badge. It's not badge. It's just badge. DG is like the J in jam. Bridge. Budget. Edge. Fridge. Judge. Knowledge. Here are some common words that also have a silent D. Handkerchief. It's not handkerchief. It's handkerchief. In fact, an informal word for this is hanky. The D isn't even written there. Handsome. Sandwich. It's not sandwich. It's sandwich. Wednesday. Let's look at E. There are lots of silent E's in English. Normally, if an E is at the end of a word, we don't pronounce it. Like in these words. Before. Bridge. Example. Give. Have. Some. Sometimes the E affects the pronunciation of the previous vowel sound. CAP, for example, is pronounced cap. But if we add an E to the end, it becomes cape. The previous vowel, in this case, A, is pronounced like the name of the letter in the alphabet. A, cape. Similarly, cod becomes code. O becomes O. Hat becomes hate. Quit becomes quite. And sit becomes sight. Be careful, this rule doesn't apply if E is the only vowel. These words, for example, are pronounced be, he, she, and this word is pronounced the or the. Here's another helpful rule. If the past form of a verb ends in ed, we normally don't pronounce the letter E. Called. It's not called or called. It's called. Helped. Looked. Seemed. We only pronounce the E in an ed ending if the base verb ends in a d or a t. So in a D sound or a T sound. Some examples are ended, included, started, wanted. What about G? Well, we don't pronounce the G if it's followed by an N at the beginning of a word. But there aren't that many words like this. Some examples are gnat, gnaw, gnome. It's also usually silent if GN is at the end of a word, like these: campaign, design, foreign, rain, sign. Again, be careful. If GN is in the middle of a word, most of the time we pronounce the G. For example, in words like ignore, magnificent, or signature. The combination GH is usually silent after a vowel sound. Daughter, night, thought, through, way. And now the letter H. If a word begins with GH, the H is silent, like in the words gherkin, ghetto, ghost. Similarly, if a word starts with RH, the H is silent, like in rhinoceros or rhythm. I always forget how to spell these two words. There are also a lot of medical and scientific words that start with RH. For example, rheumatic or rhinoplasty. If a word starts with WH, the H is normally silent. Whale, what, when, white, why. But you should be aware that some native speakers pronounce WH as wh, so it's like an HW. Whale, what, when. It's not super common, but it exists in some dialects. H is also sometimes silent after a C. For example, chemistry, mechanic, school, stomach, technology. Remember, I said sometimes. CH is more often pronounced ch, like in chair. And sometimes it's even pronounced sh, like in chef. There are also a few words that start with a silent H. For example, air, honest, honor, hour. In American English, the H in the words herb and herbal also aren't pronounced. So in American English, these words are herb and herbal. But don't worry, most of the time if a word starts with an H, you pronounce it, like in house and hat. What about the letter I? Well, here's some good news. We basically always pronounce I. The main exception is in the word business. It's not busyness, it's business. And now the letter K. This one is quite easy. K is silent before the letter N at the beginning of a word. For example, knee, knife, night, not, no. Let's look at L. Unfortunately, there's no real rule here. I've seen some people on the internet say that it's normally silent after A, O, and U, but that's incorrect. Most of the time we pronounce the letter L, like in ball or fold or result. With L, you just need to learn the exceptions. Some of the most common ones are calf, half, chalk, talk, walk, balm, calm, palm. It's also silent in the words could, should, and would. Another one is salmon, salmon. In the word almond, the L is optional. I personally say almond, so I don't pronounce the L, but you can also say almond, almond. There aren't many words with a silent M. If you're learning languages, you might be familiar with mnemonic. The first M is silent. A mnemonic is something that helps you to remember something else. And now the letter N. This is very simple. We don't pronounce N if it comes after M at the end of a word. For example, autumn. It's not autumn. It's just autumn. Column, condemn, dam, hymn. What about the letter P? Well, we don't pronounce P if it comes at the beginning of a word before an S. For example, pseudoscience, psychiatrist, psychic, psychology. It's also silent in front of N and T at the beginning of a word, but there aren't that many words like that in English. Some examples are pneumatic, pneumonia, and pterodactyl. A pterodactyl is an extinct flying animal that lived at the same time as dinosaurs. Technically, it's not a dinosaur, fun fact, but lots of people associate them with dinosaurs. There are also a few other random words with silent Ps. For example, coup, cupboard, raspberry, receipt. And now the letter R. In standard British English, as well as in Australian English, the R is silent if it is followed by a consonant or if it's at the end of a word. For example, in this word, fork. In American English, it's fork, but in British English, it's fork. Start. In American English, it's start, but in British English, it's start. And now at the end of a word, star. In American English, it's star, but in British English, it's star. Teacher. In American English, it's teacher, but in British English, it's teacher. However, if the following word starts with a vowel sound, we normally pronounce the R in British English as well. For example, if we put an is after teacher, the teacher is. The teacher is always right. The letter S. Unfortunately, there aren't really any rules here, but luckily there aren't that many words that have a silent S. Some of the most common ones are aisle, bourgeois, debris, island, and aisle. Yes, the first word and the last word are pronounced the same. They're homophones. There are quite a lot of silent T's in English. For example, it's silent before CH. Catch, sketch, stitch, watch, which. Yes, this last word is pronounced the same as that word. It's normally silent in words that end in S-T-E-N. For example, christen, fasten, listen. It's also normally silent in words that end in S-T-L-E. Castle, hustle, whistle. And then we have words that have been taken directly from French and end in E-T, such as ballet, buffet, gourmet. But don't let that confuse you. Most of the time we pronounce E-T at the end of a word. And then there are some random words that you just need to learn. Some of the most common ones are asthma. There's a silent H in there as well. It's asthma. Christmas, mortgage, and soften. There's also often. In this word, some people pronounce the T and some people don't. It's your choice. I personally say often, so I don't pronounce it, but you can say often if you want. We're almost at the end. Let's look at the letter U. Yes, the U is sometimes silent as well. U is often silent after a G and before a vowel. For example, colleague, guard, guest, guide, guitar. The letter W. If a word starts with WR, the W is always silent. Just look at these words. Wrap, wrinkle, wrist, right, wrong. If a word starts with WHO, the W is often silent. For example, who, whoever, whole. There are also a few random words with a silent W. Some common ones are answer, sword, and two, the number 2. And now X. Honestly, there aren't that many words in English with a silent X. The most common one is probably faux. Faux. It comes from French. The same goes for the letter Y. It's very rarely silent. It's silent in the word prayer. Prayer. It's also often silent in mare. But there are some people who pronounce it, particularly Americans. Some Americans say mare, mare, so it's silent. And some Americans pronounce it. They say mayor, mayor. And finally, the letter Z. Again, there aren't that many words in English with a silent Z. The most common ones are probably laissez-faire and rendezvous. Laissez-faire, rendezvous. Both of these words come from French. And that's it. Obviously, I haven't given you every single word with a silent letter. There are a lot, but hopefully these rules and guidelines can help you. As I said in the beginning, if you can think of other words with silent letters, please write them in the comments.